Hello, my name is Priscilla Cortez Boer, and I'm currently caring for my 5 nieces and nephews who are in foster care. Although my husband and I thought our days of caring for children were over since our 3 kids are grown, we got the call asking if we wanted to take care of our brother's kids. The answer was clear. Initially, we thought we would be taking 4 children. We started the process to get our home approved during this time. The children were separated, placed in 2 different foster homes. It took a while to get my home approved, and I wasn't certain that what was going on or what the delay was. I was worried about my nieces and nephews, especially because I knew how hard it would be for them to be separated from one another. While we were going through the home approval, we learned that the kid's mother was pregnant again. The social worker asked if we will take in the baby. My oldest 2 children were living with us still, and we had to ask them to move out to make room for the younger children. I only have 3 bedrooms in my home.
You're doing fine. You're doing fine.
So it's a small home for 5 little children. It was a lot to ask, but like I said, we know how important it is for children to grow with their siblings. However, for some reason, agreeing to take the baby delayed the approval even more. No one really explained to us what was causing the delays.
You say when the baby slowed up approvals, is that
Yeah.
introduction of the baby?
I didn't find out until almost the last month that she was pregnant, so it was chaos. It took a total of 9 months for us to get approved and place the kids with me. The biggest problem since taking the children has been providing for them financially. It's been very confusing trying to understand all the funding rules. There was no communication about funding during the 9 months that I was waiting for the children to be with me. Once they were finally in my home, I was told that I will only get foster funding for the oldest child because she's technically not related to me since she has a different father. For the other 4 children who were related to me because they were my brother's children, I was told I'll go apply for CalWorks. I didn't know the difference between CalWorks and needy families. I just assumed that the people at the office I was told to go to will understand what I needed and know what to do for me. However, the person who attempted to help me was extremely rude and asked me questions that I didn't have the answers to because I was not given any information by the children's social worker. For the first 4 months the children were placed with me, I only received foster care for the oldest child, but I received nothing for the other 4 children. We struggled for these 4 months attempting to get readjusted with 5 small children with very little funding to provide for them. After 4 months, I finally got approved for CalWorks. However, I got 2 CalWorks cards. I guess they opened 2 different cases. No one really explained it to me. The next month, there was no money added to the cards. I had to go into the CalWorks office each month for 8 months in a row to get them to add the money manually to the cards. And at the start of the new month, in order to pay for our monthly expenses, it was very difficult for me as I had 5 children, young children I was trying to care for, and a broken vehicle that I couldn't afford to fix. It took hours out of my time, and that was time I should have been caring for the kids. Of course, I used both cards to pay all expenses of caring for the kids, but a couple months ago, I got a notice that I had been overpaid because I had 2 cards They have made me afraid to use the either card now. I'm sorry. With the fear that I might get in trouble for using the little benefits I received. The whole thing made me feel like I'm abusing the system when all I'm trying to do is care for the kids. In terms of the actual financial support I receive, it makes little sense. I receive $764 a month for the oldest child, since we're not related. But for the 4 younger siblings, I only receive a total of $934 a month, which is equal to $233 per child. I was told that the money is less for the 4 that are related to me because they are related to me. This makes no sense. The funding that was received for the children is nowhere near enough and has caused my family to deal with serious financial struggles. My husband does not get to work that many hours at the moment, and I cannot go find work because I have to be around all the time to care for the kids, because they are all so young and we cannot afford a nanny. These financial difficulties have not allowed us to properly fix our cars when they have broken down, which has made it all more difficult to drive back and forth to Fairfield for the visits with the children's parents. This has forced us to stretch out our funds just to get month by month. I just learned that a new program will change the amount that relatives like mine receive, and that soon will get funding equal to foster care benefits. This is a huge thing, and I'm so happy that Solano County has opted into the new program. It still does not seem fair that relatives like me, who want to make sure that their families stay together in a loving home, might not receive foster care funds just because their county has not opted into this program. My kids are growing up so fast. I love these kids with all my heart, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that they all stay together. I worry that as the kids get older, I will stretch out my resources even more, and if any of the kids develop any special needs, my understanding is that because I'm a relative, they won't qualify for any specialized care to help me provide for those needs. The system is really not fair to relatives like me, and it is putting unnecessary burdens on us when we are just trying to do what is in the children's best interest. It seems to me that all families should have access to funding they need and should be automatically enrolled to get the fundings and other services they need. I do not understand why relatives have to apply for fundings themselves. The rules are complicated, and it has been nearly impossible for me to understand what is going on while trying to meet the needs of 5 young children. Having a process to get these things in place for families will take a much needed burden off of me and my family, and allow us to focus on helping these kids make a successful transition into our home and cope with the trauma and anxiety that they are dealing with. Instead, the system has resulted in us experiencing additional stress and confusion during this already difficult time. I want to thank all of you for giving me the time to tell my story, and I appreciate all your work to continue to improve this system for the kids.
Very good. Yeah, thank you very much, and boy, stepping up for your brother's children, that's very huge. And did you say a child of yours moved out to make room? That's when he moved out, he or she was how old?
My daughter,
Yeah,
she was 19.
yeah, wow. Wow,
And my 18-year-old, as soon as he turned 18, he moved out too.
yeah,
So.
yeah. Wow. Any other questions or any questions? thank you very much for being here. Okay. We will go on to Brian Blaylock. And then I'm going to ask you, Angie, if you have any comments sort of at the end, just based on the testimony from the caregivers.
Great. Thanks so much for the invitation to speak today. My name is Brian Blaylock. I'm the Director of Youth Law Programs at Bay Area Legal Aid. We represent hundreds of youth all throughout the Bay Area and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of relative caregivers in the San Francisco Bay Area. Bob mentioned earlier how difficult it was to follow Angie, but I think it's relatively easy to follow a lawyer. It's really difficult to follow saints. In listening to the description of the work they've done. Honestly, like I said, we work lots with relative caregivers, and in our work, they really are doing the work that is by definition the work of saints. We ask of them so much, yet frequently we give them so little. As a system, we give them so little. They take children into their home, often unexpectedly, with little warning, little resources, and little preparation. They take these children in because they love these children. Grandparents, and it's often grandparents, over 35% of the relative caregivers in California are seniors, take these children in because the children need them and because the system needs them too. These relative caregivers are the backbone of our child welfare system. We rely on them as a system. Almost a third of all of our placements in California with relatives. Our foster care system would simply not work if it wasn't for relative caregivers. And our foster care system is in the process of asking even more of these relatives. As part of the initiatives coming out of the Continuum of Care reform and AB 403, California is focusing more and more on reducing residential group home stays and reducing congregate care and moving youth to other less restrictive and more family-like settings, like FFAs and like relative placements. What I want to highlight today is that we do not currently have a system in California that adequately or easily supports these relatives so that they can better provide appropriate care even for the children they have now, much less for more children as we attempt to reduce congregate care stays. When a child is dropped off at a relative's home by child welfare, not only are they frequently lacking basic necessities like clothes, shoes, books, school supplies, toiletry, and the like, but relative caregivers also frequently face a confusing and harrowing process to access appropriate funding, which they need to appropriately take care of these children. Honestly, the process of foster care placement is traumatic enough. Our system should not be further traumatizing relative caregivers as they're trying to get what they need to take care of these children. I'll give you an example from some of the clients that I've worked with. Gina and Rachel were siblings and placed with their grandma in a Bay Area county. Grandma was on a fixed income, like so many seniors are, and was not sure how she was going to be able to take care of her two granddaughters, but she took them in anyway because honestly, that's what grandmas do. Then the credit card debt began rising. So she was told to go down to social services to apply for CalWORKs while the children's foster care benefits were being sorted out. So she did, but then when she went down there, she was told she actually couldn't apply for CalWORKs because mom was still receiving the money. And when she asked, well, what could she do? She was told she needed to go and have mom, who these children were just removed from, go down to the social services office and terminate her own CalWORKs benefit. And so she continued to provide care for these kids without any funding at all, and her credit debt continued to rise even further. The children then received a notice denying them foster care benefits because they were not federally eligible. Angie already did a great job describing what that means and pointing out the fact that what it means is that it's a rule that doesn't make sense. And in California, what it means is that we don't pay foster care benefits if the child is placed with a relative. Fortunately, this grandma was able to call legal aid, and fortunately the legal aid in the area was my organization where we actually do youth benefits work. In the Bay Area and in LA, that's true. There are advocates there. Outside of those areas, there are very few advocates who even do this work. And so we were able, through some advocacy, to get the children CalWORKs because they were clearly eligible. And then, through a state administrative hearing, we were able to prove that the county had done the federal eligibility test incorrectly, meaning the children were actually eligible for foster care benefits. And that last bit was very important because the CalWORKs grant for 2 children right now is at most $636. 2 kids per month, $636. The foster care benefit amount for 2 children right now, who are both at least 15, is at minimum $1,676. That amount is actually tied to a UC Davis study that says, hey, that's the minimum adequate money we should be giving foster parents in order to take care of children. And so if you get foster care benefits, you get that minimum adequate amount. If you get CalWORKs, you get much, much, much less. Last year, California took great strides in better supporting relative caregivers through the creation of ARC, the Approved Relative Caregiver Funding Option Program. You heard some things from Angie about describing ARC and some of the things of how it falls short. And when I say falls short, it doesn't mean that it's not a fantastic program, but it means that there are certain ways that we still treat relative caregivers worse than we do non-relative caregivers. One of the biggest, the simplest way is that if you don't happen to be living in one of the 42 counties that opted into ARC, you just don't get to benefit from ARC. There's some other things too, the absence of an infant supplement, the absence of a specialized care increment for kids with disabilities, the absence of a dual agency rate for kids who are also regional center kids. So in other words, all of those kids who are incredibly vulnerable, who are very much at risk of being placed in congregate care if a relative does not hold on to them, we give them much less through the ARC program the way it's set up. But what I want to focus on instead is ARC also gives relatives less support almost by accident. And these are the problems we can and should do something about right now. ARC treats relatives as second-class placements through kind of accidents of implementation. To describe these flaws, I'm going to describe kind of globally how caregivers receive funding to provide care for a child. For a child who's receiving foster care benefits, this process is set up to be seamless and invisible to the caregiver when it works the way it's intended. So a child is placed with the caregiver, and the child welfare worker, who's responsible for the child's well-being, gathers all the necessary information, submits to a foster care eligibility worker an application, who determines then the appropriate funding streams and turns on the money to the caregiver. This allows the caregiver to do what we most want him or her to be doing, focusing attention on taking care of a child who's been incredibly traumatized by being removed from a parent and being placed there, while the system makes sure that the caregiver is appropriately supported to provide this care. For a child who's not eligible for foster care benefits when placed with a relative, the process is completely different, as you've been hearing. The relative is told to go to the local social services office to apply for benefits. Here it would be CalWORKs. The relative may not be able to do this immediately, regardless of how much she might need these benefits. Now that she has a new child in the home, she might have other more pressing needs, as you might imagine. Navigating schools, navigating medical needs of the child, preparing the bedroom, adding the child to her Section 8 voucher, dealing with the trauma of having a daughter needing to move out of the house to make room for this new child. Now, this is important because a CalWORKs benefit also, it only goes back to the date of application. So if the caregiver is doing all the things we want them to do, taking care of this child, being sure everything is set up for this child, but not actually going down to apply for that benefit, then that eligibility for that benefit doesn't start until they can make time to actually get down to the office and apply. And so simply what that means in the end result, the caregiver is going to have more bills, more credit card debt for doing the job that, as a state, we have asked her to do. There are other problems with making a relative caregiver go to the social services office to apply for benefits. We remove what is essentially a foster care issue from the foster care system, and we place it in a system that is primarily set up for the delivery of welfare benefits. So general assistance, food stamps, needy CalWORKs. This means that it's not a child welfare worker who's helping the caregiver receive appropriate benefits and supports to take care of the child, who has been removed from mom and placed in the state's care as soon as possible. Instead, what it means is that we have a worker who's not trained in not trained in working with kids, not trained in looking at the best interests of the child, that's trying to figure out what benefit they might be eligible for through the normal processes and mechanisms of social services. A common problem then we see from caregivers is that they're denied CalWORKs because the child is currently being aided on his or her parent's grant. This despite the fact that if social services and child welfare system were able to communicate, or even better, the child welfare system was the one that was turning on the money, they would know that the child was in foster care and this issue would never come up. Others were told that they could not receive CalWORKs without the parent coming into the office and terminating their own CalWORKs, which is would be an incredibly traumatizing process, even if the relative caregiver felt comfortable to try to do that. The way that ARC is currently set up, because ARC, like I said, makes great strides and attempts to help these kids who are placed with relatives who are not federally eligible, many of these errors would continue. Relatives may be required to file their own application for benefits, which would only go back to the date of application, it would be much simpler and make way more sense for a system to treat foster children the same, regardless of whether they're placed with relatives or with non-relatives. To allow the child welfare worker to support the relative caregiver in the same way that she would support the non-relative caregiver, with the same processes, the same attention to the best interest of the child in care, and with the same access to the same funding streams. Now, AB 423, which Assemblymember Cooley authored, goes a long ways in fixing quite a few of these. It would allow seamless funding with no additional application process on the side of the relative caregiver. It would have SSI screening built in for kids with disabilities to help fix the fact that they wouldn't be eligible for specialized care increment, and it would also allow an infant supplement, which right now is not available for kids that are on ARC. And there's also another very large fix that would be necessary if we really are going to treat kids with relatives and kids with non-relatives the same, and that's the availability of the specialized care increment, which Angie had mentioned, the specialized care increment, which is for youth with special needs and disabilities, that right now relative caregivers, even if they're in ARC County, would not be eligible for unless the child is federally eligible. It's really, really important to fix these, do these relatively easy systems fix to be sure that children with relatives can get the support and care they need and they deserve for all of the things that we are asking them to do as a system. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. Mr. Cooper, any questions? We're going to pivot here to the next panel in a moment, but Angie, any sort of concluding observations? I'm just kind of throwing this to see if you have any.
No, I think our caregivers and Brian really said it well, and I just want to thank you for your leadership and your commitment to relatives. We've been working with you to try to address many of these inequities, and we've only touched on a few of them here. I mean, there's inequities with who gets guardianship assistance benefits until 21, and we treat relatives and non-relatives differently there. There are inequities in terms of the supports and services available to relatives versus non-relatives, and hopefully we'll address some of that through Mr. Stone's bill and AB 403. But the list is really long in terms of how differently we treat relatives, but like Brian said, our system will collapse without them. So it's really, I really appreciate your leadership and that we're trying to chip away at these inequities and create a system that truly supports the people that we rely on.
And is some of this a consequence of just we have a statutory system that started a long time ago, and some of these distinctions made at the time have had some logic, and now we keep building on it, and it just more and more becomes a jury-rigged system because the services that have been added, they don't really fit well, and yet we're sort of stuck in a time warp with a basic structure?
I think so, and it's why we were so glad that the continuum of care reform work got underway, because as soon as that happened, we said, and our colleagues said, that's a great opportunity to start really talking about what families need, because truly if we want children to grow up in families, we have to support them in families. So, you know, I think the work is being done here in California, but we have a little farther to go.
I want to thank you both for coming, and my colleagues are in different places simultaneously around the building, but the purpose of this is start building a record, educate me honestly as the chair of the Select Committee on Foster Care, and we're really reaching out to subject matter experts to kind of, my general approach to the subject is just figure out what seems to be the next most important thing that we need to be pushing on. And so I would not put myself in the category of a member who is the subject matter expert, though in time I'll be more of that, but the member that's looking to understand, see the issue through the lens of people who are in the middle of it, sort of on the front lines, and then understand how to address the problems you're encountering and focus on first things first to the extent we can. First things first, other things not at all. Right. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, very good.